Me and my friend Bella had a mutual friend studying abroad, so we both flew down and visited our boy Chris in Buenos Aires. After a few nights in the bigger city, we took a 5 hour flight to Salta, a much sleepier town. We stayed at a youth hostel there and signed up for a full day tour by bus to see the salt flats. We got picked up in the bus before the sun rose, and we started to drive way up into Salta's mountain range. It was amazing. For lunch, we stopped at an alpaca ranch, and we were given lentil soup with alpaca meat. I have a deep love for lentils, so I felt right at home. After lunch, we drove all the way down to the salt flats and hung around out there. It was then that I asked our bus driver if he had seen any aliens or anything out of the ordinary. He said he grew up here and hadn't, but said there's plenty of people he knows who have. The reason I asked is because it was such an expansive landscape and so remote. No electricity or power lines on the roads. Everyone I saw in the area looked super indigenous. Anyway, we left the salt flats and took the 4 hour drive back to the city. The sun is starting to set. I'm at the back of the bus, looking in wonder as we pass what looks to be mineral processing plants, a dilapidated primary school, houses that barely look like they're standing. I started to fall asleep. The 10 hours in the bus and large altitude changes were starting to get to me. But I'm awakened by the tour guide on the intercom. He basically said, in Spanish, "Hey, you kids from the US who were asking about weird stuff in the sky. Check this out. Never seen this before." Chris, Bella, and I started looking around. I look out on the horizon. We're travelling westish because the sun was setting in front of us. I see some flashing lights just above the road, but a little to the right. After a few minutes, I realise it's just an airplane. I see wings, flashing lights on the wings, etc. But that's when everything started to make less and less sense. We continue to drive west, but the plane, as we got closer, is flying east, directly at us. It's now about 300 yards away, maybe 200 feet off the ground. We get even closer, and it's starting to feel like the plane isn't moving. Sure enough, it isn't. We are now almost next to it. All the lights are flashing. It's a commercial airline silhouette. All the passenger windows are open. As I can see the lights from inside the cabin. I see no logos on the plane. I hear no sounds of the engine. It's right there. And suddenly, I realize we're driving past it. And as I crane my neck to keep looking at it, its altitude hasn't changed at all. Never heard a sound. It felt like it was a sculpture stuck into the remote valley of the place. From seeing the plane to literally driving past it was about 10 minutes of viewing. I had pulled out my phone, but at the same time, I had two witnesses and we remained fixated upon it, trying to find a logical reason why this was happening. Nothing made sense. Felt like a life glitch. Now, all of us saw this. At least my friends and I was with us on the bus. About 2 hours later, we arrived back in Salta. We got dropped back off at the hostel, and our tour guide didn't say shit. I was just kind of shocked as I left. I live close to LAX in LA, so I'm very familiar with how loud large airliners should be when landing. I've seen them at the same altitude and distance, and they make enormous amounts of noise. I'm not a pilot, but I also know you can't just glide a plane of that size, for that long, at that altitude, in zero headwind. Nothing about the plane's behaviour made sense. Upon returning to the hostel, I searched online for the nearest airports. Salta only has one, and it's pretty small and close to the hostel. We were 2 hours from town at the sighting of this incident. One time I was in my apartment with my parents, and my brother slept with my parents at the time, because he was a baby. So I remember not being able to fall asleep, so I was just sitting up in my bed. My bed was placed in the middle of the room, facing my door, which led to a hallway. Going left to right, this is important, because at the end of the left side was the kitchen and living room. On the right side, a little further down, was my parents' bedroom. So I was just sitting there making up stories in my head when I saw a figure. It was short, spiky, and I was like 7. It had a suitcase in its hand. It just kept walking from where my parents' room was to the kitchen. Even though I was young, I knew that if I brought it up or even talked about it, it would come back. So I told my parents what happened, but not really. I just said I saw something in my hallway. So when I said that, I started sleeping in my parents' room. My dad one day had enough and sent me to sleep in my room. I was terrified. So my mom came with me to sleep with me. She only told me this a few years ago, that she couldn't sleep either. And when she looked at the door frame, she saw the Grim Reaper, or something that looked like it. So she started praying, and eventually fell asleep. When she woke up, she told my dad we needed to move out, so we did. Only a few years after that, we were driving, and we had to drive past those apartments. She told me to remember when you said you saw something in the apartment. I responded, yes, why? Then she told me something super scary, to me at least. She found out through a friend that they were practicing some type of witchcraft in the apartment. Still don't really know what I saw or what it was. Just some short little creature with spiky hair in a suitcase. Okay, so this morning, I woke up to something that scared the living shit out of me. It was around 3 a.m., maybe 3:47 a.m., and I awoken strangely. Now, I say this after a big night staying up to 11, so usually I'll sleep all night. But for some reason, I woke up to a feeling as if someone was near me, or someone was in my presence. And as soon as I woke up, I was staring directly at an old lady who was sitting on my desk. I could see her pretty clearly, and she was easy to see with the dim hallway light shining on her. At first, I thought it may have been my chair, as my chair had clothes on it, and looked at it. But as adrenaline kicked in, I realized she was far from my chair, and was actually sitting on my desk. She had grey hair. It looked all through the hallway light is blue. She had a smile on, and it was super creepy. It looked as though she had some teeth missing. Now at first, I thought it was my mom. She had the exact nightgown as my mom, so I was gonna shout Mom. But I quickly realized that it couldn't have been, as the lady on the desk had darker skin. Usually, I have a knife or gel blaster beside my bed. I was planning on using one. But I realized they weren't there, and I'd left them outside. I thought of everything I could do. Locked eyes with her for at least 1 minute, still smiling. I thought I would get up and approach her. I did so, and within seconds, she disappeared. It was like as soon as I changed angles, she left. But it couldn't have been that, as I saw her lying down, and then saw her as I perched up. I don't get scared often, so this was weird for me, but also gave me the creeps. Everything was so perfectly timed. Waking up at 3 a.m., staring into her. The light showing what she looked like, and as I approach her, she disappears. It later really strange. I live in Australia and told my mum about the story. She said it might have been an Aboriginal. My mum and dad have had similar experiences in the past. And this is the second time this year this has happened to me. Last time, I noticed someone on the edge of my bed. When I was little, maybe around 7 or so, I had my first paranormal experience. My mum always told me that she felt like I was attracted to things from the spiritual realm, even as a baby. But this experience is the first one that is my own memory, and I remember it vividly, and I'm now 26 years old. My mom was unlucky enough to have not only my father die, but also my little sister's father. My dad passed away due to a car accident, and my sister's dad committed suicide after a battle with severe depression. Needless to say, my mom had it pretty rough. And being a single working mother, she would often take us to a family friend who babysat us while she worked late nights at the hospital. The woman who babysat us was a warm, kind, and gentle woman named Rhonda. She always took the best care of us and my sister, and I really enjoyed staying with her. Rhonda had two birds who we loved to talk to, and they would repeat simple things like hello and what's up. We thought it was the coolest thing. After a long day of playing, my sister and I were off to bed, and Rhonda tucked me into my bed in her spare room downstairs. My sister was still pretty little, and she slept in the same room as Rhonda because she was too scared to sleep alone. And Rhonda was like a grandma to us who was more than happy to share the bed if we got scared. I was a big girl and loved having my own room to sleep in, and I was never scared. On this night, though, I was having trouble falling asleep, and I just kept tossing and turning, growing frustrated that I wasn't asleep. And for some reason, I began to get anxious and became fearful. I didn't know why I was scared, but I was. After what felt like forever of me laying there, contemplating getting up and crawling into Rhonda's bed, I heard something in a low, calm, male voice say, "Marissa, it's okay, just go to sleep." This surprised me, but it didn't scare me. I believe that as a child, you're more open and susceptible to paranormal things, due to the fact that you're not conditioned to be fearful yet. With age, you learn what's scary and all the things that go bump in the night that you should run away from. But I was still so innocent that I didn't register this as threatening. Actually, this calmed me down and I started to feel very tired and just accepted what the voice told me and went to sleep. The next morning, Rhonda made us breakfast, as she always did. She sat across from me and sipped a coffee that I always asked for a sip of, because I wasn't already a strange child. I had also a taste for coffee. She asked me how I slept, and I told her I was scared and that someone told me to go to sleep. She looked at me confused, and she asked me if I had a dream that someone was talking to me, and I told her no, I was awake. She said it was probably the birds talking, and again, I told her I was sure it wasn't. She then asked me if it was a man's voice or a woman's voice, and when I instantly said it was a man's voice, her face changed from the usual cheery, warm expression to put off and uncomfortable. I had never seen her face look like that before, and I think that's why I remember this so vividly. She changed the subject quickly, and we went about our day, and I didn't think about that again for years. Fast forward into my teens, my mum and I were having a discussion about the paranormal, because I had a lot of strange activity happening, and she asked me what the first experience I remember is. I shared the story about the man's voice at Rhonda's house, and how odd Rhonda's reaction was, and my mum looked at me and her eyes widened a bit. Now, Rhonda went a little MIA a few years later, and unfortunately, she just slowly lost contact with us, and eventually, she was no longer part of our lives. I hadn't seen her in years. When my mom collected her thoughts, she looked at me and said, "Marissa, you know Rhonda's son died in that room, right?" I didn't. I knew she had a son who passed away from a tragic overdose, but I was so young and never met him, so I didn't think about it. I looked back at my mom, and we didn't have to say anything. We both were thinking the same thing. If I was hearing a spirit speak to me, there's a good chance it could have been her son. From what my mom said about him, he was a very kind and caring person, much like his mom. Maybe that's why I wasn't afraid when he spoke to me. I'm not saying that this is factually what happened, but it does make me wonder. The voice I heard was real, that much I do know. Regardless of who it belonged to, it's sure to me that much is true. Since that experience, I've had many, many more, and unfortunately, they got much more sinister as I got older. It got very, very dark for a while, and I witnessed things that you usually only see in horror movies. The small town of Guysborough, Nova Scotia is like every other East Coast town you've ever been to. Economic majority is based on lobster fishing, colonial style town hall and post depot, millionaire paradise homes, etc. We have a small business ice cream parlor, a lucrative coffee and microbrew company, and our fair share of boonies, tall tales, and secrets better left unexplored. It's where I've lived and worked my whole life. Unlike my father, I couldn't stand being on a boat for more than 20 minutes at a time. So instead of learning his trade of setting, reeling, and repairing lobster traps, I took a liking to the electrical trade. I went to the NSCC in Port Hawkesbury, got my certificate in residential and commercial work, and began earning my hours alongside registered journeymen. Took me almost 7 years to write my test and get my seal, but as soon as I did, I took out a loan and opened my own business in town. With almost a complete monopoly in the area, I should be able to pay off that loan within a year or two of steady work, and then start working on my student debts. It was an average overcast day when I got a call from the local municipality office. Mrs. Diana Sharp, an older woman who lived around Cook's Cove, was given a grant by the government to fix up her little house and bring state-of-the-art luxuries to it. I was recommended by the local union as a reliable tradesman, and they asked me if I could go out and assess the house for repairs. With it being a lazy inventory day, I agreed and was at her door within the next hour. The house was an old two-story shack, somewhat decrepit and weathered by the harsh coastal environment. Even now, the Atlantic winds battered the small home as the first drops of rain began coming down. Paint peeled off the vinyl sidings and trash from previous upgrades on the house laid strewn in the wooded edge of the property. From a glance, I knew this job would be a doozy, but I gathered myself and tools and knocked on the door. An elderly woman opened the door a crack, her beady eyes narrowing at my own gaze. "Can I help you?" came from a raspy, worn voice. "Hi, I'm Cal. I'm an electrician. I'm here to assess that quote for you." The door flung open, and her demeanor switched instantaneously. "But of course, so nice to meet you. I didn't expect you to come so quickly. Come in, come. She ushered me into the house, as her hunched body shuffled away from the door. I walked in and was greeted with the average granny cottage smell of must and age, mixed with fresh baking bread, a hint of cinnamon, and the feeling of safety. The place was uncharacteristically calm. Outside, a storm was brewing, one that could threaten to take this shack away with one gust. But the interior seemed to ignore it all, stuck in a mood of having long-time friends coming over for a visit. I dropped my tools and took off my jacket, eager to get out of the coming storm. I heard dishes being moved and a gas stove being lit. "Would you like some tea? Warms up the heart and soul on days like today," Diana called from the kitchen. I figured a cup wouldn't hurt and accepted her offer. 2 milk, 1 sugar. As the kettle boiled, Diana sat us down at her dinner table and handed me the grant documents. She had a sizable sum granted for electrical repairs and upgrades, and said she trusted me with using every penny responsibly and respectfully. I told her I would do just that, and asked her if I could look around while we waited for our tea. She stood and led me to the various rooms in her humble abode. Aside from her kitchen and dining room, the first floor consisted of a decent-sized living room and a smoking room. As we went along, she outlined what she wanted done with the home. Replace all the electrical components, install new lights, run a few new circuits, the usual groundwork. The second floor had 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. I've not much use for these rooms anymore. Children up and left the moment they turned 18, and not a single one has come to visit, she snorted with contempt. But I reckon the switches, lights, and other doodahs should match the rest of the house. I felt my heart drop for her, alone in this withering house, with no family to visit and keep her company. Nevertheless, she carried herself high, all the way down to the basement door in the kitchen. I had missed it entirely before. The small wallpaper indent in the wall looked nothing like a door. A hole sat where a knob should have been. An old-style iron latch kept it closed, and the aged brass hinges creaked as she opened the door. Be mindful of the basement, Sonny. It was never finished by my good-for-nothing husband, so it must muck down there. The dark, cramped stairs led down to a cobweb-infested space, with barely enough room to stand upright. The floor was only concrete at the base of the stairs. Like Diana said, it was muck and mud for the rest of the room. Brand new appliances, like a water heater and gas furnace, stood atop stone tiles, saving them from the muddy mess. The panel was mounted on the concrete wall, directly in front of the stairs. Damn, this looks like it'll be a real job, I muttered under my breath. Nothing you can't handle, I assume, Diana quickly snapped back, sweet and inviting as ever. We walked back up to the kitchen as the kettle started to wail. I was looking forward to that cup of tea when a figure in the corner of the room caught my eye. It was a man, standing tall and gaunt in ratty-looking clothes. His face was covered by a long, matted beard and a fisherman's cap. His rubber boots bulged past his sizable legs, and his whole body dropped as if he was soaking wet. I was completely caught off guard and just eyed him down for a few seconds before Diana grabbed my chin and yanked my gaze towards her. No, that's my good-for-nothing husband I was just talking about. He's no harm, I can assure you, as long as you don't meet his gaze with yours. She said this as if talking about a family pet. She released her iron grip from my face and headed for the stove. As she grabbed the kettle, I took another glance at the corner, only to realize the man was gone, vanished like a cloud of smoke on a windy day. What? Why? How? Was all I managed to sputter out before I was handed a cup of tea. Matthias was a good man, Diana began as she sat down at the table. He loved and cared for us, brought home food and money, made sure the house never fell into disrepair. She took a long sip from her cup. It's been almost 20 years since this ship washed ashore after a storm, battered and damaged with no one aboard. He and his 2 crewmates were pronounced lost at sea after a months-long search. I wept almost every day for a year. Her voice ached with sorrow as she choked back tears. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and wiped her tired eyes. Then one day, he appeared at the door, in the shape you saw him. He said nothing, walked in and up the stairs, and he was gone. She gave a shrug and a half-hearted smile. Since then, he appears only when guests arrive and watches over us. Like I said, you won't have any trouble from him, so long as you don't look into his eyes. I stood there for a minute or so, cup of tea shaking in my hands, thoughts whizzing around inside my head. I took a deep breath and managed to ask the burning question on my lips. What happens if I look him in the eyes? My voice broke like I was a teenager again. Diana took another long sip from her cup, let out a sigh, and said, without missing a beat, "You'll drown where you stand." I've always had trouble sleeping, ever since I was little. I also have very vivid dreams. I can recall the tiniest details, and they tend to have some sort of storyline. At the age of 11, I first actively noticed it. I dreamt about the woods. I love going to the woods, and in the dream, I was searching for bugs under logs and rocks. I felt something creeping around. I didn't feel like it was staring. I was just surprised there was a little girl in the woods. I didn't see much of the creature, but I did notice some long strands of what seemed like a fleshy surface gliding off into the woods. It was quite tall, since I could see the leaves moving. After that night, I began noticing it more frequently. When I was 15, I developed sleep paralysis and severe nightmares. In my sleep paralysis, I saw the shadows of my room moving. It always ended the same. I could see fingertips in my peripheral vision. They were too long to be human. The fingers would close in from the sides. There were no hands, just fingers. Very, very long and bony fingers. When they covered all of my vision, they would rapidly close in and I would wake up hyperventilating, sweating, and sometimes screaming. In my nightmares, I saw the same fingers. I had one recurring nightmare. I was next to a lake in the woods. There was one long and narrow dock stretching over the lake. However, it never started at the lake. In the woods, I felt something creeping around me, testing the waters of who and what I am. At some point, the fingers would creep around a tree, and all I could think of to do was run towards the lake. I could hear it crashing through branches, thundering after me. No matter what I tried, it always got me. If I stopped, it would get me. If I ran, it would catch up. If I jumped in the lake, he would grab my feet before I could hit the water. I had this dream so many times. I tried everything I could possibly think of. If it got me, I would wake up in pure panic, screaming, sweating, and hyperventilating. At some point, I could barely sleep anymore. And at some point, I was getting bored with the same dream, same outcome, same monster. I learned that if I did nothing, I would wake up much sooner so I could also start to sleep again much sooner. The second time, he was never there. This went on for a few months, until one day it seemed to be bored with me. That was the first night I fully saw it. The long fingers are as long as my legs. Its body and head are fused, and it felt like it was curious. Its legs were more like a wolf's hind legs, or a horse, depending on how you look at it. It had human feet, but it walked on its toes, and its feet were 1/2 meter long. Its face was not something I had seen before, or something I can describe, really. It had a big mouth, a little snout too, again in a horse or dog kind of way. Its black eyes were full of wonder, surprise, and curiosity. Not what I expected. After looking at each other, it slowly walked into the woods again, looking back a couple of times whilst I stood there. Ever since that night, it's been in every dream I had, no matter where that dream played. Always somewhere in the back. I think I've met it in a different form too, in a different dream. While I was sitting on a train, which went very fast, everything suddenly stopped moving and a conductor passed me. He kneeled in front of me, looked me in the eyes, and it was the same eyes. He talked to me about my insecurities and doubts. I could only listen. In the end, he said, "Remember what I learned from you. Don't be ruled by fear." I've moved out of this house for almost a year now, and I'm very happy about it. The house never ever felt right. The lights never seemed to ever truly light up a room, and always seemed dark wherever you were in the house, even if a natural light was let in. All my friends say the same thing, that if they come over or stay the night, that just something just felt wrong, but we never knew why. The house was very tiny. It only had one floor and even had no basement. Instead, it had a crawl space with a dirt floor. The hallway leads to all the rooms. The hallway in the house was the worst. In the hall is where you feel the worst in the house. Even when I was 16, I would still run to my room through the hallway, feeling like someone was going to grab you if you walked or stayed there for too long. And one walking past the bathroom, almost every time, I could swear I would see something in there with the light on and everything. A black shape, but it was the only bathroom and also felt wrong. I even cut showers short sometimes because of the feeling of being watched. It didn't happen often, but me and my brother had the lights go out on us for no reason, while either using the bathroom or taking a shower. We just tried to be like, it's an old house, it happens, but it would still freak us out. There was even one day that my brother got stuck in the bathroom. The door was locked shut, even though there was no lock. Then the lights went out, and I don't know what happened to him in there, but he was screaming like someone was going to murder him. My dad finally broke the door down. My brother ran out as soon as possible and straight to his room. This particular incident happened to my ex-girlfriend on November 26th, 2015, and has since stuck with me. I initially researched the incident the morning after, as it seemed to me like something that would have been experienced on a larger scale, but sadly couldn't find anything but debunking videos for sky trumpets and the like. On November 26th, 2015, Thanksgiving, my girlfriend and I returned to my apartment in Queens, New York, and passed out after a long night of feasting. At about 2:40 a.m., we were awoken by the sound of a very low, ominous rumble that rattled the window panes. At first, I thought it was a helicopter passing by or a semi that might have actually turned off onto a residential road. But something felt off. It felt like it was in the apartment. When we both were awake enough to start investigating, I went to the other side of my apartment to see if it was coming from out back, but the sound didn't seem to change directionally or reduce or increase in volume. After 2 or 3 minutes, a new sound added to the rumble was this echoing chime, almost like a strange moan. It was very soft compared to the rumble and seemed distant at first. After a few minutes of this chime and moan began to get much louder, and I began to get worried. I was very on edge, so I put on a jacket and went downstairs on my stoop to see if I could at least pinpoint where the sound might be coming from. Once I was outside, the sound was very loud. I mean loud enough that people were poking their heads out of windows and standing on their stoops at almost 3 a.m. The whole thing went on for about 30 minutes. We even checked the news to see if there was something happening. It's New York City after all. But nothing was being reported. I never found any concrete evidence in my research, and I can't explain it to this day. My neighbours all remember it though. My roommate works at Universal Studios in Diagon Alley. The employees who work there can be moved to different stores when help is needed. The Diagon Alley has a smaller, hidden, nocturne alley hidden behind the cheery shops, showcasing pastries and magic bubblegum. Organ and Burke is the only store located in that smaller section of the Wizarding World, and is meant to be creepier than the rest of the alley. To make it more realistic, Universal bought a lot of the decorations in that store from estate sales. There's one mirror that hangs over a trunk in the corner that guests and employees have sworn that when they look into it, they see a woman standing behind their reflection. However, when they turn around, she's gone. This happens so often that instead of having the mirror at a level where someone could look into it, it was suspended so that the spirit couldn't be bothered by guests and vice versa. I used to work for the Spring Hill Suites across from SeaWorld. A couple years back, a woman checked into room 1509 and then walked to the CVS across the street to buy a pocket knife. When she got back to her room, she offed herself. The housekeepers and housemen used to come to the front desk to tell us about how they saw a woman walking down the hall who just disappeared. Or would turn the corner, and when they turned that same corner, she was gone. Housekeepers who clean that room will have drawers and cabinets open on their own. And the engineer who found her smells carnations anytime he gets on the elevator on that side of the building. It was already a Friday evening, and to add some cherry on the icing, the boss was in a happy mood and gave our team the go-ahead to leave about 45 minutes early before the office hours actually ended. I packed my stuff, rushed quickly to the elevator, and in about 10 minutes was driving out of the parking lot, sipping my cold coffee that I had grabbed from the cafeteria on my way down. I took a look at my watch. It was 5:34 p.m. Perfect. It was a pretty hectic week, and I was really looking forward to the weekend. Not that I had any plans as such, but I just wanted to be at home, have a few friends around, get drunk and play games all weekend. I was already visualizing all of this in my mind as I entered the highway. My office is located an hour's drive away from my home, and though the distance does not usually bother me much, but at times like these, it could be a pain in the ass, as I was already anticipating reaching home ASAP to get more time on my hands. It was already sunset, and I had already covered about a third of the distance and pulled up at the first red signal for the evening. I pulled up at the signal and was slowly sipping the cold coffee, eagerly waiting for it to turn green as a homeless guy knocked on my window, asking for spare change. In my country, it's very common to see homeless people asking for spare change or food at the signals. I hadn't noticed him almost limping towards my vehicle until he had appeared in my field of view, only for about 5 seconds. Maybe I was anticipating the weekend so much that I hadn't paid attention to my surroundings, except for the signal. "Hello, kind sir. Please spare some change for this poor soul," he said with a smiling face. He was a middle-aged man with unkempt hair and beard, wearing a soiled green cloth, torn and exposing his left elbow, which was wrapped over his light grey t-shirt, which also covered part of his dark brown shorts. He held a stick in one hand and a can in the other. I usually spare some change for the homeless, but I noticed that I had kept my wallet in my backpack while buying the coffee, and it was in the back seat. Being too lazy to reach for the backpack, I politely responded, "Sorry, I don't have any change today," as the lights almost turned green. I kind of expected him to frown and curse me under his breath, which usually happens with me when I deny change to the homeless. However, his smile just widened to more of a grin, which freaked me out a bit. All of this happened in a few seconds before the signal turned green, and I started my car and drove off. I could still see him in the rear view mirror, looking in my direction and letting out the same grin, though it made me a bit more uncomfortable. I was relieved to have escaped the situation and gradually, subconsciously, went back to thinking about trying out the new gin that I had read about last week. About 5 minutes had passed as I reached the next signal. I slowed down my car as I finished my cold coffee and was shuffling some Tame Impala on the speakers as I heard a knock at my window. I didn't look up this time because I didn't want to have another encounter like I had a short while ago, until I heard those familiar words. "Hello, kind sir. Please spare some change for this poor soul." I instantly looked up and almost froze when I saw the same guy from the previous signal, in his green shawl torn at his elbow. He again showed his eerie grin from before as he softly kept knocking at my window. I was puzzled, trying to figure out how he got here so fucking fast when I saw the signal turning green. I looked to him and quickly apologized and noped the fuck out of there. I was confused at this point, but at the same time, tried to convince myself that I was seeing things and it was my mind playing tricks on me. I nervously laughed the situation off and drove another 7 or 8 minutes to the next signal. Now, I was about halfway through and partially relieved that this was the last signal for the time being, as the next signal is located about 5 minutes from my home. The sky started getting darker and the streetlights illuminated the paths ahead. I was still kind of paranoid and kept checking my surroundings for anything unusual. About 76 seconds remained until the signal turned green, and there were no signs of anything peculiar around me. By the time it got to 30 seconds, I suddenly started feeling a bit more cold, though I bet that I hadn't changed the AC settings since I set from work. I quickly looked outside my window, but there was nothing but cars outside and felt relaxed. However, unusually more cold. However, I turned to the passenger window side and my balls dropped. The same guy was standing at the other side, this time with a more sinister grin. As the streetlight shone over him, I got a closer look at him and noticed that his eyes were as black as the void. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Even my body wouldn't move. It was almost like I was fading into the void in his eyes for what felt like eternity. Suddenly, I snapped out of the hypnosis to the sounds of car horns behind me. The lights had already turned green, and I could hear the people behind me cussing and honking. I quickly glanced back at the passenger seat's window and noticed that he was nowhere to be found. I quickly started my vehicle and drove out of there. This can't be possible. How the fuck did he teleport here? Were the people around me unable to notice him? I was getting more and more anxious by the minute as I drove and avoided any stoppages. I glanced at my watch as it showed 6:17 p.m. There wasn't much traffic ahead, so I drove a bit freely and tried to focus on the music that was playing, adjusting the volume to a perfect 25. I was almost relaxed when I saw someone familiar standing at the footpath. I quickly slowed a bit and turned back. There was no one. It was my imagination. As I turned around to face the road, I saw him standing at the footpath ahead. I let out a loud shriek as I instantly switched the gears and put my foot on the accelerator, disregarding the traffic cameras on the way. Reaching home ASAP was my top priority at the moment. I only paid attention to the road and nothing else. I finally reached the last signal. I was shivering at this point, desperately hoping to avoid any further encounters with this person. The signal showed about 50 seconds remaining. I just closed my eyes and started counting backwards to open my eyes at the exact same time the signal turned green. As I closed my eyes, I started hearing random knocks on all four windows of my vehicle. Hell, even at the sides of my windshield. I was pale, shit scared at this point to even open my eyes. The knocks turned to palms slapping at my windows. I even heard the door locks of my vehicle flapping aggressively. I was profusely sweating and just wished that whatever was doing this doesn't enter the vehicle. I screamed, "Leave me the fuck alone!" Silence. I thought it was all over and slowly opened my eyes. My jaw dropped when I saw that my car was surrounded by what looked like the replicas of the same homeless person. I couldn't see any other vehicles on the road, only the same guy. All of them had black void eyes with the same sinister grin on their faces. After what felt like forever, I blinked my eyes and everything went back to normal. The vehicles behind me honked aggressively. I quickly started my car and drove. As I took the turn which was supposed to lead towards my apartment complex, I noticed that I was back at the last fucking signal. What the actual fuck, I thought. I heard a knock at my window. I knew who it was. Slowly turning my head around, I saw that familiar fucking face. He looked normal this time, but I could tell something was off. He spoke. I looked around and saw everything was in reverse. All the vehicles, people, everything fucking in my vicinity. I blinked. Everything went back to normal. I sped through the green signal and took the turn. Again, the fucking signal. This time I heard knocking, looked at him and saw that the old guy didn't have eyes. There was just plain skin where his eyes were supposed to be. To say that I pissed my pants would be an understatement. I quickly drove through the green signal and took the turn to find myself back at the same signal. I was both physically and mentally drained at this point. It felt like the world was glitching out on me every time I made a turn. I heard a knock, and this time I reached for my wallet lying inside my backpack and took out whatever cash I could find. I slowly rolled the window and put my trembling hand out, offering all the cash I had, without looking at whatever was standing outside. I felt a warm, humanly hand take the cash from my hand, but what he said in its response left shivers down my fucking spine. Almost. The voice sounded purely demonic, like a mixture of two voices. At the same time, from the corner of my eye, I noticed the entity vaporizing into thin air. I could almost confirm that the creature wasn't in any way a human. As soon as the signal turned green, I just stomped the accelerator with all I had, hoping that the next turn just led me straight to my home. This time, I actually made it. I was almost at the brink of a mental breakdown, unable to process that shitstorm I had just crawled out of. As I parked my car, I checked the time, and it was 11:26 a.m. I was literally confused, as I didn't expect this much time to have passed. Was I tripping? Was all of this just a figment of my imagination? However, of all the events that happened during the evening, the one thought that fucked me up the most was, what fate would I have met with had I refused to spare him some change? don't know how much time I have. I'm currently hiding in my bathroom, trying to figure out how this has happened. Let me explain. I live in the city. Not much really happens to me here. I get up, go to work, half-ass my job in accounting, and head home. Rinse and repeat. 2 months ago, I moved far away from my little rural town to get away from the inherent claustrophobia of having to deal with an overprotective family and cliques of gossiping townsfolk. You know, a fresh start. I don't think I have the mental comprehension to be able to sustain a healthy relationship, hence no partner. I live alone. However, for the past week and a half, I've been hearing noises at night. At first, I chalked it up to some strays landing in my garbage, or my neighbours being particularly rowdy. I started to notice, though, it was coming from inside my house. The low humming of whispers, the gentle tread of footsteps sneaking a path as to not creak my floorboards, and scratching. Now, I'm not the kind to feel paranoia, but this was weird, and it somehow got weirder. The whispers got louder. I noticed things had moved in my house that shouldn't have moved. An ominous, faint purple light began piercing the gaps of my closet door, before abruptly disappearing on my approach. I should have just noped my way out of the house, but I stuck it out. Whatever this was, there had to be a logical explanation, right? Maybe I'm just sleep deprived. Maybe the noises were coming from outside, and I was misconstruing the information present to me. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. I got home from work the other day, and while fiddling my pocket to find my keys, I stopped and saw runes just below my door. Someone had etched into the concrete what looked like letters of some form of runic alphabet. Next to it, a small red fingerprint. I knelt down to inspect it. This wasn't done quickly. The etching looked professional, like it took time and effort. As my fingers ran across the runes and met the stained fingerprint, I felt a jolt of electricity run through my fingertip. Ouch. What the hell? What was the... Excuse me? When I say I almost jumped out of my skin, I mean it. I turned around and standing there was a short old lady with a kind demeanour about her. "I'm so sorry, dear. I didn't mean to make you jump like that," she said emphatically. It's okay. You just startled me is all." My heart was pounding. Great. Now little old ladies are scaring the crap out of me. "Well, my dearest apologies. I'm your neighbour from across the road. I guess we haven't had the chance to be acquainted. You're not in your house very often." She spoke meaningfully, yet there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. As she spoke, her posture went arched to straight. It was as if she gained some sort of confidence. I couldn't tell you why, but that, mixed with how tightly fixated her eyes were on me, just didn't sit well. Yeah, the joys of working life, am I right? Anyways, I just wanted to give you this. She extended her saggy, veiny arm towards me with what looked like a letter. It was sealed by a small wax print of what looked like a goat's head. "This is just a small welcome from everyone here in the community." She smiled and gave a little tilt of the head. "Oh, well, I appreciate it. Thank you." I wasn't too sure how else I could respond. Maybe I should invite her in for some tea or something. "Would you mind if I came in for a drink?" I was taken aback. It's not often someone you've just met will invite themselves into your house. But common courtesy got the better of me, and I let her in. She wasn't in my house very long, and she got significantly less talkative. It was almost as if her mind had wandered. Admittedly, I felt bad. Maybe it was her age and she had trailed off. Something was still off, though. She may not have been talking, but she was definitely paying attention. I caught her inspecting every nook and cranny in her peripheral vision. This was getting a bit much for me, and with everything that had been happening, so I quickly poured her a glass of water and escorted her back to the door. "Thank you, dear. I look forward to talking to you soon," She smiled and head again. It's my pleasure. You take care now, as I closed the door. I went into my living room to watch her off. She was gone. There's no way an old lady moves that fast. I didn't know what to even think anymore. The next couple days played out the same. The noises, the purple light. Investigating never brought up a shred of evidence as to what was going on. That's when we get to tonight. At 2 a.m, I was laying in bed when I heard a loud thump come from outside. As I get up and open my curtain to inspect, I see through the window across the street the little old lady. And she's looking at me, smiling. This time, it's a big, big smile. She starts pointing towards something in my direction. I then remember. The letter. It's in my dresser. I never opened it. I rush over to grab it. I break the seal. Inside is a small note. As I read it, I look up to my window. She's gone. The words written on the paper send a sharp chill down my spine. Thank you for letting me in. I've lived in my house in London since I was 6. I'm 18 now. My neighbourhood has always been quiet, apart from the occasional attempted burglary. I've also never been an avid believer of, well, anything really. Paranormal, religious, you name it. I'm a man of science and logic. I try to explain things using principle. I've always been able to prove an abnormality to be the work of fiction or some justifiable means. I cannot explain this though. I never really talked to my neighbours. Never really needed to, apart from 2 of them. Keith, a 19-year-old boy who lives 2 doors along from me, and Dot, the 80-year-old who lived between me and Keith. Keith was the same as me. He was atheist and scientific, so believe me when I say nothing scares or surprises him. Dot was always nice to us in that old lady sort of way. Keith would jump over the garden fences and play football with me, and Dot would bring us out sweets and snacks. This was how it was from day one of living where I lived. I remember the day, the exact conversation I had with Keith as he entered my garden. I was 9 and he was 10 at the time. Me. Sup, dude? Keith. Hey, he said in quite a glum voice. Hey, what's up, man? Wait, you haven't heard? Heard what? Well, it's about Dot. What about me? We both spun round in a startled manner. Dot was standing there, just as usual, with a tray of cookies. She seemed white and very cold, which was odd considering it was 27 degrees Celsius outside. Me. Oh, hi Dot. You really didn't have to bake cookies. Well, I can't just let you boys stand around without anything to snack on, can I? She chuckled. While I was speaking to Dot, I noticed something. Something a bit off. It was Keith. He was still frozen. His eyes wide as if he had just witnessed something so terrifying that it petrified him into stone. What was even weirder, ironically, was that he hadn't spoken. Now, Keith was so charismatic, he would outlive God having the first and last word in a conversation. But not this time. This time he just stood there, not uttering a word. Me? Are you okay, Dot? I continued. You're looking a bit pale today. Oh, it's nothing, dear. I just feel a bit under the weather, that's all. I'm going to lay down for a bit. I'll see you boys later. I said bye, and before I uttered my last syllable, Keith was disappearing over the fences back into his own house. That was strange. He didn't say bye to me or Dot. Anyway, I didn't take much notice of it. Later that night, I was laying in my bed, and I heard loud footsteps coming from next door. Then a scream. Then several thud noises, and then silence. What the hell? Did Dot drop something? I was a bit concerned, but it was nothing that kept me awake. I woke up in the morning to ask my mum to check up on Dot, as I heard crashing in her house the night prior. That's when she told me. Those words that left me in utter shock. I'm sorry to say, Dot died a few days ago. She fell down the stairs and the damage was too severe. A few days ago. It's been almost 10 years since Dot died, and to this day, I cannot explain what happened and who I had seen in her garden the day earlier. All I know is that last night, whilst I slept, in the vacant house next door to me, I heard crashing, as if someone was falling down the stairs. This room is great. I have a sink, a mini fridge, a hot plate to heat water for tea, and a TV with my Switch hooked up. My Kindle with all the books I could dream of. I have a door that goes outside so I can get dressed and go to work. I'm essential. I work in a grocery store. Unlike everyone else in the house, I have to leave. I share a bathroom with my husband, but that's it. I rarely see anyone else outside of work or through the windows when I get home. The first few nights were awesome. I played on my game system, started reading. I've been working on the 5th novel since last week. Then it started. A feeling at first that someone was watching me. There's a big window in this room, as it's normally the plant window. One of those big 3-paned semicircular windows that's big enough to put a sitting area if you wanted. Specifically through the right glass panel that faces my bed. The feeling comes and goes, but only at night. I'm not modest. I could care less if someone saw me naked. I'm not promiscuous by any means, but not particularly attractive either. I have short buzzed hair, extra poundage, and nerdy glasses. My eyes are a cool hazel that swap from brown to green, but the rest of me is bigger than average. To work, unusually wear dress, pants and collared shirts, and at home, leggings and hoodies. Not really the type of woman most peeping toms would look in on, let alone come back for more. The feeling comes and goes. It's been happening more often than not. It only ever happens at night, and it happens whether my light is on or off. What started as a feeling slowly developed into a malevolence. It feels more and more like someone is watching me with intense anger and hatred. I don't know how else to explain it. As if someone from outside is trying to get in, and their hate is palpable. Then dreams started, probably brought on by this feeling. Someone standing there, a figure, just staring in, unmoving, and usually, not even the subtle sway of a living person, not a rise and fall of breathing. At first, the figure was just a shadow. There is still no features, but it has become a solidified darkness, as if the figure was literally cut out at the edges and darkness remained. When I wake up, I'm always covered in sweat and terrified and stare out the window. Sometimes I can fall back asleep if I can completely cover every inch of myself with a blanket, just like a child. I've gotten to where I can't sleep unless that door to the porch and the outside is locked, and I can focus on some sort of calming audio to distract me. I can't understand. What is this thing? Why is it so angry at me? What did I do to get its attention, and how do I make it go away? No, I don't do any drugs. Never have. I have at most a cider every other day with dinner. I'm so freaked out about whatever is making this feeling and these dreams happen. Are there any things that follow this pattern? I'm not familiar with many paranormal events outside of the usual story fare. I first heard of the Wendigo when reading an article several years ago about Wendigo psychosis. What was described as a cultural mass hysteria that occurred when individuals in certain tribes who had committed cannibalism or were facing starvation began to act violently, believing they were Wendigos. This article went on to briefly state the Wendigo legend, And to my understanding, the myth was that the Wendigo was one of two entities. One, a spirit that possessed people suffering from starvation in winter, driving them to commit cannibalism. And two, a person who had indeed resorted to cannibalism and was transformed by their wicked deed, becoming an emaciated humanoid that was unable to satiate their hunger and hunted humans to eat. But over the last couple of years, I've been seeing all sorts of claims that Wendigos are deer-like, look like zombie deer, are humanoids with antlered skulls or some such amalgamation that usually involves cervine features and antlers. I can't seem to find anything reliable that says this is a traditional or cultural description of the Wendigo. However, I did notice that Wendigos and skinwalkers are often lumped into the same lot, as it were, and skinwalkers are far more varied in appearance. As a skinwalker is an individual able to shapeshift with the use of magic and animal pelts, they certainly could have a cervical appearance. The most compelling tales I've read and heard tend to involve canine shapes, but I can't help but think from the things I've read that a skinwalker is more likely to be antlered than a Wendigo. So where is this pop culture image of the antlered Wendigo come from? I invite you to share your knowledge, research and resources here. My personal theory is that the Wendigo and skinwalker legends have become blurred, causing confusion. Aesthetically, ungulate skills are particularly creepy, so it also makes sense that artists would enjoy using that imagery in their work, further perpetuating this description. For some context, I'm an investigative journalist that likes to dabble in paranormal investigation. My assignment for the week was to find out why there were so many aircraft disappearances along a certain route. The original consensus was faulty aircraft or neglect from the company, but after further investigation, it was found that multiple airlines and models of aircraft were used on the route. I dug for days, but couldn't find anything substantial that could explain all of the disappearances. So, what was my solution? Fly on the route, of course. Probably not my best idea, admittedly. I figured if I rode on one of the flights, and there was some sort of misconduct practiced, I could catch it. You must understand, it wasn't every flight that disappeared. The amount was just large enough for someone to take notice, and we were still thinking it was an easily explainable cause. How little we knew. The flight itself is a 4.5-hour flight across the country. No seas, oceans, or lakes large enough to hide a plane, let alone multiple. The only equipment I had was this laptop, a camera, and a satellite GPS that wouldn't affect the plane's instruments or communication. I also decided to go big with a first-class window seat and in-flight Wi-Fi. If I ended up getting a scoop, I'd make back my money and then some. The first 2 hours of the flight have been normal. Takeoff was swift and painless, and the crew came through with refreshments about an hour in. I spent my time observing every aspect that I could. I watched the crew, the other passengers, and as much of the plane itself as I could see through the window. My GPS showed that we were on the exact route we were supposed to be on. All is well. I must have dozed off. It's dark outside now. I'm not sure where we are. My GPS is acting up. We must be in the middle of a storm. Strange. I remember the pilot saying it was supposed to be clear along the entire route. Maybe it was just a sudden electrical storm. Everyone else seems calm, so maybe the pilot made an announcement about it while I was out. There's a man on the wing of the plane. That may sound almost normal, except we haven't landed yet. We're still 30,000 feet up in the air. Somehow, though, that's not the strangest part. He's wearing a 1990s dive suit, one of the ones with a huge metal helmet. He's covered in seaweed and barnacles. He's just standing there, staring. He hasn't looked at me. In fact, he hasn't moved at all since I first saw him. He's just staring at the side of the plane directly in front of him. I guess whoever's back there has the window shade pulled down, because no one else seems to have noticed him. Something is wrong. It's still dark outside. The electrical storm must have passed, though. My GPS is rebooting. The GPS is saying we're above a huge body of water. There's nothing like this on the route. I can't be sure, but I think the diver moved. He looks closer to the plane than he was before. It's been 5.5 hours. The clock on my laptop was showing the wrong time until a few minutes ago. I don't know what's happening. Everyone is acting like this is normal. Reading books, watching movies, sleeping. It's like this is just every other flight to them. The captain or crew haven't done anything since when the plane was supposed to land. No announcements, no drinks. Hell, not even a walk through the cabin to see if everyone's okay. Okay, he definitely moved. Now he's facing my window. He has this huge gloved hand outstretched towards me. I don't know what to do. I can't get anyone's attention. When I try, they just ignore me. The GPS still says we're above the same huge body of water. I can't even tell where. The screen won't move or zoom. It's just blue. I know it's not frozen because the altitude is still fluctuating normally. It's getting darker outside. I'm scared for my life. The driver made one final adjustment. His huge barnacle cover hand changed into a point, pointing directly at me. The altitude is still changing, but it's dropping, and fast. Shit, I'm starting to see the waves below me. Guys, I think it's over. I'm just trying to type this out as fast as possible now. At least I have my answer. It's not a malfunction, and it's not misconduct. It's him. It's the huge figure pointing at me from through the window. I hope this uploaded in time. This is it. The waves are getting closer.